Oh yeah.
What's up guys, welcome back to Inside Out Precision, and today's video we're going to be talking about F.O.C, which is taking the world by storm right now. There's a lot of kind of misconceptions about it and a lot of confusion about it, and I get asked about it on a regular basis here at the shop. So I'm going to kind of break down what it is, how it benefits you, and then how to calculate what your current F.O.C is. So F.O.C stands for front of center weight, meaning that, you know, a perfectly balanced arrow, if I put a balance point right in the middle of the shaft, in the very middle of the shaft, it would balance evenly. Well, because there's more point weight than there is tail weight on an arrow, generally that arrow is not going to balance right in the middle. It's going to balance further towards the point of the arrow will be the balance point. Now, there's a big craze right now with extremely high F.O.C. And to be honest, I don't disagree with them, but in terms of flight characteristics, it doesn't really benefit you to have an insane percentage of F.O.C. For a lot of years, anywhere between, like most arrows with an insert and 100 grain broadhead in it are going to have somewhere between 7 and 10% F.O.C. Recently, there's a big trend where guys are getting really super stiff arrows and then they're putting like a 75 or 100 or even 150 grain insert or outsert and then a 100 grain tip. So they've got, you know, anywhere from 150, some guys are shooting 300 grains up front. And while the theory is okay, and that's that the point weight is pulling the arrow rather than the fletch is pushing the arrow, I've never seen any science to actually back up that claim. In the target world, where flight characteristics of an arrow are critical, I can tell you that almost every pro is, you know, when they're building an outdoor arrow, they're trying to get somewhere between 11 and 16% F.O.C. For most people, that's going to end up somewhere between 110 and 120 or 130 grain point. But if you're wondering what your F.O.C is, there's a pretty easy way to calculate that. And then I'll go over kind of, you know, what you can do to change the F.O.C and what you might need to do to the spine of your arrow if you do that. So there's a really cool little calculator online. It's called archerycalculator.com, and it just requires a couple of measurements from your arrow, and then you enter those in and just hit the calculate button and it tells you what it is. So you'll need a fine balancing point for this. I'm actually using a little peep spreader here that I can set down, and it's a really fine edge. I've also seen guys use, you know, a pen or another insert if they can get it to sit still, like the gold tip ones have kind of flat sides, you can get it to sit there. But basically what you're going to do is take your arrow and we're going to balance it on this to where neither the point or the veins are touching the surface. And this can be kind of tricky, might take a little bit, don't get too flustered. But when you get to that point where it's balanced, I actually need to bring that a little bit back. It's going to ask you for two measurements. So the first measurement is the overall length of your shaft. And just like when you're measuring your arrows to cut them, you're going to measure from the throat of the nock, so right where the nock actually touches the string when you put it on your bow, to the end of the shaft. Now that's excluding the insert and the point. We're just measuring to the end of the carbon. So for this arrow, for example, we're at, and this isn't super precise because I'm doing it quickly, but we are 26 inches exactly. So I go in my arrow calculator here. For this value, I'm going to enter 26. So I've got that value. Now it's going to ask me to measure from the throat of the nock to the balance point. So I'm going to take my tape measure again, measure from the throat of the nock right to the balance point. On this one, it's 16 1/4. So I'm going to put in 16.25 for my second value. I'm going to hit calculate, 12.5%. So for most hunting arrows, I actually think that's a pretty decent F.O.C. You know, there's other talk about how higher F.O.C when it hits an animal, it helps with penetration because that point weight is pulling the shaft through. And I don't disagree with that. You know, I think that's a valid point. But when you get too much F.O.C, and a lot of guys don't realize this, is, you know, I've talked about the spine of your arrow in past videos, and when you get a bunch of F.O.C, when I load up the point weight, a bunch on an arrow, it's going to soften up that spine. So if I take let's say a 340 spine axis, and then I put 250 grains up front, that's now gonna probably be more like a 450 spine. So lots of guys will load up their point weight, wanting better FOC, and what they're not realizing is that they're decreasing their spine a ton, like 2 or 3 spines. So then they go out and shoot it, and you know their groups are all over the place, and they don't know what's going on. They think it's a sham. Well, it's because they softened up their spine. So if you are going to load up your point weight, usually you're going to need to go to a stiffer spine arrow, and that's where things can get kind of tricky, because generally speaking, the stiffer spine of an arrow I have, the more grains per inch that arrow has. So the arrow is going to be heavier overall. So what happens, for example, like a 300 axis, that's 10.7 grains an inch. So on a 30-inch arrow, let's say, even just before I even put anything on it, that's already going to be 340 grains, 330 grains. I'm just doing the math off the top of my head. But then I put my vanes and my knock on it. Maybe I have a wrap. Now I'm at 365, 370. Then I put a 100 grain insert in it and another 150 grain point. All of a sudden, my overall arrow weight is way up there. You know, I'm going to be 550, 600 grains sometimes. And again, kinetic energy is linked. It's on a bell curve. So everybody's talking about momentum and kinetic energy these days. And if I tank my speed too much, if I have too much weight and not enough feet per second, not enough speed, I'm going to lose kinetic energy on this side of the bell curve. Conversely, just like a really light arrow, if I have way too much speed and not enough weight, it's like throwing a ping pong ball at somebody. It's going to hit them really fast, but it's not going to hurt when it hits them. So it's about finding that balance. So the trend right now, if you want to load up your FOC, you want to go weight forward, I would suggest finding a shaft that is, the shaft itself is lighter, so like an Easton Bloodline or the Gold Tip Velocity series, where even a 300 spine arrow is still only like 8.2 grains per inch instead of 10 or 11.5 or 12 like the Easton FMJs. Then you can jump up in spine, load up your point weight to get the overall weight of your arrow where you want to be. You've got your FOC, you've got good overall weight, but you're still going to maintain good speed. And so I think that's really important. Again, for flight characteristics, I really don't see any benefit in going past that 20%. That's a lot of front of center weight. That arrow's going to balance like right here somewhere. And I'm talking mostly for outdoor arrows here. Indoor arrows are tough because they're so big and stiff. A lot of them, you have to put so much point weight up front to get the spine right that you're going to have a lot of FOC, but you're only shooting 20 yards, so it's not a big deal. But for outdoor arrows, like I said, the most forgiving shafts seem to be somewhere in that like 11 to 16% range. So you can kind of play around before you glue everything together about, a lot of target points have break-off points. They can be 120, 110, 190, and you can play around. You might have to burn a couple points to figure it out, but start with your arrow at a certain length, cut a little bit of it off, stick that point in, find your FOC, and then play with it from there. Just like a bow can be tuned to be forgiving, so can an arrow. So I hope that answers some questions on FOC. I get asked about it all the time here, and like I said, when we're tuning bows and whatnot, I just don't see the benefit of having like 35 or 40% FOC. I like to get them somewhere in that 11 to 16% range, like I said. Again, I'm not saying I'm the know-it-all on this. I've just set up a lot of bows and a lot of arrows, and that seems to be where we get the best results. So if you have any more questions on that, as usual, please feel free to reach out. There's a lot to learn about arrows and arrow building. It's not something that you just kind of learn overnight. So if you have any more specific questions, go ahead and shoot me a message on Instagram at inside_out_precision or in the comment section below here, and I'll do my best to get back to you and get those arrows shooting as best we can. So hope that answers some questions. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. We've seen a lot of really positive feedback lately, and we thank you guys so much. It really helps us out when you guys like and subscribe our videos. So if you could do that for us, I'd be really appreciative. Until next time, keep it in the middle, and remember, precision is a decision.